right, guys, so who here wants to talk about cybersecurity? How exciting, right? Yeah, so I'm very happy to be here. A little closer here. Okay, you guys hear me okay? So today's topic is, why are hackers attacking educational institutions and what can we do about it? A little bit about me. So thank you, yeah. Shoot. Oh my goodness. So Tatiana Montenegro, I've been in the technology industry for about 12 years. I started my career at Citrix in Fort Lauderdale, actually, so neighborhood. And from there, I went to work at Cisco. I was there for about 7 years. Actually, kind of traveled all around. So I was in San Francisco as well as Sydney, Australia with Cisco, and in Chicago. And then recently, after building a family, I decided to move down south to be closer to family. And in there, I worked with VMware. So I was an engineer at VMware. And recently, I took on a new challenge with Palo Alto Networks. And that's sort of my sort of history. But as far as why am I passionate, why is education important to me? I went through a lot of work to try to put myself through school, and I went to University of Miami. I graduated, and it's the reason why I'm here today. I would have never been able to do what I've done in my life and my career if it wasn't, if I wouldn't have been courageous enough to pretty much just put it all into investing in my education and sort of allowing for that to sort of catapult my career. So, and in that, I'm also fascinated about cybersecurity. I mean, who's not, right? But why is education important to me? Funny thing, I'm building this presentation. My friend that I haven't seen in years sent me this picture of us at school. And then it's just a really interesting picture because you look at the desk and you remember that back in the day, there was a lot of paper, there were a lot of pencils and books, and you had, there were no computer. Well, I mean, I had a computer lab, but in high school, right? And it's just, things have changed so much, right? Like just from, and again, I'm obviously dating myself, but I'm a local to Miami, so I went to Braddock High School, and my class was 96, right? So, in the 90s, this is what school looked like. There's a lot of paper, there was maybe a computer lab that you shared, but, and again, this is sort of, maybe the new generation can look at this and just wouldn't even be able to imagine that was the way that things were, right? So how does that compare to the school experience today? I mean, it's mind-blowing, right? I mean, the fact that you need to, sometimes it's a 1-per-1 tablet, right? Every and depending on the school system, you have a tablet, and that's pretty much a lot of the work just happens. And as far as those devices and those students, how do you keep that secure, right? And I think about this a lot because obviously the challenges that COVID brought, that not a lot of school systems were prepared to take, right? I met with a school system on yesterday, Friday, and we were sort of going through COVID and what that was for them, and they recalled that during COVID they had to they were at capacity of the amount of students that they were able to take onto their network because all those students went to work remotely, and those obviously at the time they had to bring in big boxes of hardware and everything else and sort of like account for that growth, right? So you think about how much work an institution like a school system really has to do to make sure that their students are able to connect, right? And in the same way, there are bad people out there that are trying to get the data using tools like AI that make it a lot easier to sort of understand where the holes are in the network to be able to capture that data. If you think of somebody who's graduating today, the ability for someone to be able to, a bad actor come in and take the sort of sensitive information, social security numbers, and imagine this person, maybe a student in middle school or high school that they're not even of age to have credit. And if they're hacked and that information sort of stays with the attacker, they could hold on to it and then when they're of age, pretty much ruin their credit. So, with all the challenges that I had in putting myself through school and everything else, I can't imagine, can you imagine just the kind of impact that has, like the negative impact that has on a whole population of individuals, and in them not having anything for them, it's not their fault. They didn't do anything to be in this situation, right? So it's a problem. So what happens? Basically, possible cyber attacks, right? Those bad actors that I spoke of before, that leaks student data, information that should be, the school system still keeps a lot of information that's very sensitive, and if that information is leaked outside, it becomes a problem. And then lack of user awareness, right? Maybe the user's not necessarily knowing where they're going, who they're sharing the information with, answering quizzes online that they may think are okay, and it could be detrimental to the information that the bad guys are getting, right? So just to sort of paint a picture, sort of what happens after a cyber attack, right? So yes, that the bad actors, they get the personal information, but that results in tax dollars that are lost, right? Because the students can't go to school, they can't study, there's a lot of things that they're limited to do. And with that, it becomes a problem for the students not only to keep learning, but also in the future. So yeah. Wanted to sort of go into a specific example. So this is September of 2022, but if you could imagine Los Angeles Public School District, right? So I believe it's the second largest district in the United States. So 7,000 teachers and staff had to change their password given this. But if you could just imagine 500,000 students were potentially compromised. That's a lot of kids, a lot of social securities, right? And then it's just, they don't know if they were or not. Obviously, it just blows my mind as to the impact that we see this and we see it all the time, and it's happening more and more often, and the percentages just keep going up and up every year. But and you look at these numbers, and this is just one school system, right? So with all of that, we know that that's the problem, right? And to add to that, this quote here is from Miguel Cardona, who's the educational secretary of the U.S. And basically, to give you an idea of the tools that schools use, the technology tools, it's about 2,500 tools that they use for technology in a school system on average. So obviously, if you have a lot of different tools from a lot of different other manufacturers that don't integrate, in the event of a cyber attack, it's going to be very difficult for you to know what to do, because you're going to have to log in. Imagine logging into 2,500 different portals and trying to find out how to mitigate what's happening. So we know that's the problem. So what's the solution? So the solution is basically a platform approach to security. There's so many different components in security, and I'll go through them. But the idea of strengthening your security posture using zero trust, right? So anybody that comes into your network, they need to authenticate, because even if they've authenticated in the past, you can't just assume that they're the same person that they're saying they are. So, nothing against regular VPN solutions out there, but if you go in as a VPN user and you just go in VPN in and out, and it could be you, it could be your spouse, it could be anybody logging in and trying to get the VPN information. So how do you ensure that individual is really that individual who should be accessing those tools, right? And that zero trust is not easy to get to, right? There's a lot of complexity. Active Directory, all of internal things would need to be cleaned up in order for you to be able to identify this is a user that should be using this application, and if they're not, then there's a problem, and that should be tracked. So that takes me to sort of like the next point. So code to cloud. When you're building applications, how do you know that that code that you're using is secure, right? We hear the horrors of Log4j, which was sort of a vulnerability that happened maybe 2 years ago, in which a lot of websites use this log system, and that log system was compromised, which meant that a lot of the websites, companies that use kind of reference those logs were also compromised. And obviously there were patches and everything that was sort of went out in order to sort of fix the problem. But in a way, how do you ensure that your code is clean, that it's secure, that you're not, that there's so much complexity to coding and generating applications to begin with? How do you ensure? How do you not forget about security, right? Security folks don't always talk to network folks in an organization. Same idea with application developers and everything else. So how do you ensure that everything is secure? And I talked about AI, right? So obviously AI-driven security as an operations, right? It's like how do you allow for AI to help you so that you automate things that you don't have to do manually all the time, but also how do you see anomalies, right? So if you see something that doesn't look right, or if you see the future and it doesn't look good, how do you get confirmation that there's something out there that you should look into? And lastly, should hell break loose and you get breached, who do you call, right? So incident response. Because you're in a bad situation, it could be not even you, but it could be a third party that you're integrated with as a school system or something like that. And then if they are in a bad place, how do you know if you've been compromised, right? So I'm gonna do more of a deep dive on each of those. So on the zero trust is more of the network security side, right? So we're thinking about more the data center, be it that you have like an on-prem data center and sort of like what applications, what hardware sort of lives there, right? Obviously you have your firewall, and how do you detect content is going in and out, as far as like any websites as an example that the students are going to be going into, and all of that. And I'll go into detail next, but the next sort of platform approach to security would be more on the code to cloud, right? So how do you ensure, as mentioned before, that your code is up to par and also sort of takes into consideration limitations that it may not be secure? And then lastly, if you want to think about like your security operations center, how do you automate a lot of those alerts so that you only get the alerts that are really powerful? Because if you have a million alerts and you have a ton of people trying to look at all these alerts, and if you could make that into a more concise message, it just not only will help you to know what's really important instead of trying to just see a million of alerts, right? When it comes to the security operations center, but also on the endpoint, right? Knowing what, in this case, students are doing, right? On those devices, and where they can go, where they cannot go, what kind of websites, and more of the tracking of the actual device, especially if the device is owned by the school, right? So more of the endpoint piece. So I'll go into that in each of one in detail. So I know that I sort of started with the networking piece. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things in this slide alone, right? Like IoT. We talk about how everything is connected today. And all of those things need to be secured. I mean, you hear things all the time about how a hacker got in through a printer that was open and it was open to the internet and it didn't have a they never reset the password, right? Like these things happen, and how do you need to know, and you need to see it in order for you to be able to take action, right? I could go on and on as far as all the other sort of components. But that's the idea. The idea is like, okay, so you know that on the networking side, you need to have advanced, and like the actual threat the attackers have gotten so smart that it's not good enough to just look at it and look at, okay, what happened in the past, and if it happened in the past and it may come and happen again. No, with AI, that whole conversation is over. It's pretty much like they're gonna be, so they could just go into ChatGPT and try to find out like how to hack this if they have personal information about us. You know, if somebody shares that they have a Windows environment and they have details, they can go in and sort of just allow for bad things to happen, right? So in this like approach to security, how do you sort of use all of those components to secure the platform, right? With advanced URL, with knowing that you can connect, as mentioned before, secure the IoT environment and sort of everything that is connected, so that you are able to give that visibility to those users. Those network administrators, for them to be able to be aware. And then also just keeping in mind how people may be connecting from different places. I think that one of the great things about COVID, which, I mean, it's terrible to say now because obviously COVID was very difficult, was that people were connecting from anywhere, right? Like it wasn't the norm anymore that people were gonna go to the office to work. Same thing for schools. The students weren't going to school to study, they were studying at home. And how do you secure those endpoints, those laptops that they're bringing to their house, if they're using their parents' Wi-Fi networks and everything else, so that they can connect from anywhere, right? Be it mobile, be it the house. And also through the internet or private cloud and so on and so forth. So then with that, so we're moving more to the cloud piece, right? And again, this is sort of going back to the platform approach, right? So we've, in essence, secured the network piece, right? Secured the hardware and sort of like the connecting from anywhere. And then next is sort of how do you secure the code, right? Like the code of the applications that you're gonna be able to access. So I do have a kind of a busy slide here, because obviously when it comes to modern applications and Kubernetes and all of this sort of story, it gets complex, right? Because there's so many different cycles. But I mean, and again, developers go through sort of I have to code the application first, but take into consideration that I can't just copy some code that could be compromised. So it kind of keeping in the security up in top of mind, in order for that to be important for while they're building that application in just the code. And that has to be step one, and they have to pretty much be aligned with the security folks, right? Because that is obviously gonna become a problem if it's not secured in the beginning. And then so then you finish your code and you've sort of built your application, and then how do you prevent insecure deployments? You're ready to sort of launch your application, and how do you make sure that when you go do that the scans and everything in place is gonna work and it's also gonna be secure? And then lastly, once the application is actually running, how do you prevent attacks at runtime? I think we've all had the situation, or maybe raise your hand if you've had a situation that you download an app, you're maybe not too familiar, and then the app just crashes all the time, right? I mean, everybody's done that, right? I mean, then you hate it and you delete it, but still, like, it could be that it's a malicious application. And you know what I mean? And us as users, like, we notice, and these things happen, and it's just knowing that, hey, that like if you put the right steps in place, that application that you're putting to download for that user is not going to cause a problem in the future. I think for school systems specifically, the application piece and sort of the cloud piece is still an industry that's very cloud adverse, obviously, compared to just a retail. Like in a past life, I did a lot of retail, and obviously the application is the life source, right? If you have Ulta Beauty was an example. Obviously, like you're buying a lot of things through that application, right? And that is extremely important to that customer, because basically the goodness of that application is pretty much the goodness of your business, and there's a lot of other things that you can do for engagement in that application. So pretty much, how do you make sure that each part of that is sort of following the right protocol. And lastly, I know I spoke briefly about more the security operations piece and security operations center and also endpoint security. As far as how do you leverage AI to really kind of provide, not only prevent the threats, right? That, okay, this is my endpoint and I'm using it, and how do I make sure that I'm accessing, so that application that we mentioned earlier, if I go into that application and I'm trying to download it, if it's a malicious application, it gets blocked, right? Like it's not something that I can do to even download that, because it knows that there's something wrong with it. But all of that happens automatically with sort of a platform approach to security. And this is just sort of a bit of detail on that, right? And sort of how the attack is stopped, right? So basically, just as an example, the user attempts to run an executable, right? They try to go to this application that we talked about earlier. And then it looks at it and says, you know what, there's something wrong with it. So then it either puts it in a sandbox to analyze it further if it is, and if it's not a problem, then they let it through. If not, then it kind of blocks it, so you're not able to sort of provide it. But then for you as an administrator, it gives you the information so that you know what the users are trying to do, and that what they're trying to do is not what they're supposed to do, right? And then again, in that example, like the attacks, ideally, the idea of that is for the attacks to be stopped. And sort of going back to more of the high level sort of security operation center, right? So you have all these analysts kind of looking into all these threats and everything that's happening day in, day out. And how do you make that, sort of to my earlier point, how do you automate that? So instead of you having 2,422 alerts, you actually just have 16, right? And then out of those 16, it tells you, hey, 2 of those are critical, 2 are kind of medium, and then the other 12 are low. So then as a security analyst, like what to focus on. Hey, these are the ones that I really need to work on because they're critical. And then the rest, you could pretty much get the information in order to help you. And then lastly, I know I talked about incident response, right? So I can't tell you how important it is to know that when you are in trouble as a school system or just as an institution or retail or any industry, just knowing who to call when you have a problem, when you know that there's something that doesn't look right in your network. This is an example, hey, how do you assess the situation? Okay, we know that there could be something. How do you run a report? How do you, call an 800 number as an example, and then they come in, they give you they want to look at everything first, right? What's going on? What are the anomalies? Like, what is happening here? And then from there, how can we sort of transform that into a good scenario, right? Like, so basically, if you know that these things are wrong, then how do you take that data to be able to stop it right then and there, and then from there just create a plan as to how to move forward and respond. So what's the benefit? So again, this platform approach that I speak of, obviously you have a million tools out there for security. And if they're not integrated, it's just going to be very difficult to be able to manage it, right? So that the whole idea of integrating not only this networking piece, but the security piece, and then also the security operations center, as well as the incident response piece, it just allows for a cohesive story when it comes to security, because you're seeing everything from a single pane of glass, right? Whereas, like, if you have a ton of different tools from everybody else, you're not going to remember what you need to do in each scenario, like, once it happens, right? So with sort of that platform approach, what are the benefits on students? we can safeguard their data, right? So all those social security numbers and all that personal information, it's going to be a lot harder for bad actors to be able to obtain it because there's a lot of security in place. The secure the connectivity from anywhere. Obviously, if you know that those devices are secure, and the way that they're accessing those devices is sort of in this zero trust idea in which that user, you need to know who that user is before they can get into the network. That allows for secure connectivity. It doesn't matter if the student needs to work remote, if that is sort of installed in their device, they're able to do that. And then lastly, continuous learning. I think this is I had one more thing. Just remember that we're doing all this for the students. But I did want to show sort of what that looks like, right? And it's not I hope I'm just gonna open a quick Google slide here and just share my screen. Because I want to show you what that looks like, right? So as an example, if I go here, it's giving me the autonomy of seeing what's going on. So for example, here I have my Global Protect agent installed in my computer, and then from here I can see what gateway I'm connected to, right? This happens automatically, but the idea is my data doesn't have to go to the data center in order for me to access the tools that I need. There's a cloud nearby where the connection is going to be a lot faster. So instead of it going all the way to Santa Clara to then come back to Miami, it's probably just going to go to Atlanta and come back to Miami, right? So the idea of that happening automatically without me doing anything, because I'm just here, I'm just connecting Wi-Fi, right? I'm not thinking about, oh yes, I need to make sure that my Wi-Fi is secure. Nobody does that, right? So yes, I have the ability to do that. And then from an application level, I can see application experience. So raise your hand here, and I know everybody's gonna raise it. If you've had connectivity issues at home and you're pissed because you don't know if is it the router, is it the internet, like what is it, right? Like, and it's annoying. So here, the cool thing is it tells you, okay, this is your CPU memory usage, right? So you can see when I logged into my computer. So you could tell that I was doing this presentation at midnight. And I was using my computer to do that. And then I woke up really early and then I connected later, right? So, it tells you, hey, you're using this much. This is how much memory you're using. This is CPU. So if you're like, okay, is my computer just completely full? Is that the problem? It gives you the ability to sort of be able to do that. And then the Wi-Fi, right? Everybody raise their hand here. Like, hey, was it a Wi-Fi problem? Was I able to connect to Wi-Fi? So it tells me, hey, okay, last night, this happened. And then, especially down south, I'm in Miami, so oh my God, the Wi-Fi there is just, I gotta call Comcast and tell them what's up, because look at this, right? It's a problem, and then obviously Wi-Fi here is great. But it tells me Wi-Fi as well as internet. But that's giving the ability for the user, and trusting that we're smart enough to be able to figure out our own stuff. So if it is a problem, then you can call, right? So to summarize, see, now I lost my tab here. I think I just had a thank you slide, and now I can't find myself here. But yeah, in a nutshell, we're doing this for the students, right? Because we want to secure their data. It's really important. And they should know what's going on and just not have to do anything about it. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Does anyone have questions?
Oh, yes. Any questions? I forgot that part.
How does this translate to policies from schools? Like, for example, schools may ask you to just use their computers versus, or maybe you're using your own cell phone to download some school applications. Like, how do schools handle that in terms of the from the communications perspective, this is how you will interact with your network?
And that's a great question, right? Because to your point, like you could be using your personal computer or your personal phone to do certain things. And that's kind of the beauty of the little demo that I gave, in which that agent is sort of like it lives in your computer, but you don't even know that it's there, right? But it's a software agent, so it's not necessarily, it's not a hardware sort of requirement. Obviously, there's a cloud component, right? But the idea is it secures any endpoint. Granted, obviously there's a license associated with it that would need to be sort of input. Usually when it comes to your personal devices, like school systems are hesitant to sort of make you download anything that would track, right, the device.
Yeah.
That only happens if it's like a personal device. For the most part, what I've seen is like a lot of school systems, depending on how wealthy they are, they have sort of a one-to-one model, right? Like ideally they have one laptop or one tablet per student, or even a 3-to-1. Obviously, as the school district, like I think Miami-Dade or like the bigger they are, just the more challenging that becomes. But in any way, it's still just thousands of students that are still sort of like in that school district, right? So it all sort of depends, but for the most part, the personal devices it's sort of a tricky way to kind of have management. For the most part, it's just the devices that are managed by the institution. And there's a lot of Chromebooks in education as well. So Chromebooks and that I've seen. Yeah, but for the most part. But great question. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, my question was in terms of security. It's related to what you said, because different states also have different policies in terms of how to secure. So it's something that it has to be thought by the organization, like the school organization, I guess. More at a city level, do they have to comply with? Because there might be levels of compliance with different cities or counties.
Yes.
So is there anything that you suggest or you think is appropriate to also put these measures in place?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because basically there's a lot of programs. So I'll give you an example. So E-Rate is a program that, school systems leverage, and it depending on the amount of students that are out there for the school system. So as an example, if you have 60,000 students, then you get allowed sort of a financial cost that you can use towards your wireless infrastructure switching or security. So those funds are sort of given from the government taxpayers. Obviously, we pay for that for students because it's public school, right? So we're paying for those services. But at the end of the day, the schools, sort of like the technology within the school, the individuals there make the decision as to what security platforms are consumed. It's not a mandate. Sometimes it is, say, I think I heard, in Georgia, some like, it's different. Like sometimes like they do mandate like a certain vendor or that they need to use for endpoint security or something, right? But it's for the most part, it's up to sort of that network administrator that's in charge. The directors it's more like a director of infrastructure, director of networking that is sort of making those decisions as to what the network looks like within the school system. And then that's the idea that if they're making these decisions and then there's a lot of different tools that are being used for security, maybe it's worth considering sort of a platform approach for a better outcome. But yeah, as far as like, there's a lot of funding. There's actually like a $12 million grant it's sort of going through Congress to see if it passes, but it would be to cover cybersecurity itself, right? So the cybersecurity solutions that I've sort of mentioned here, it hasn't gotten approved, right? So it's not something that we can count on, but ideally, the great part about it is our government is seeing that there is a need to secure our schools, and then they're trying to put more money into cybersecurity. So it's not like E-Rate that it covers. Yes, it gives you funds, but it's, you have funds for the next 4 years for wireless switching and security. It's just this is cybersecurity alone, And it may include endpoint, right? To the point earlier with like your personal devices and sort of having more security on the devices that you're using for school. So, we're making progress, right? As far as like kind of making cybersecurity top of mind. But it is important to not forget. And, for the most part, what I see is just people don't talk to each other within organizations, right? So like the networking folks don't talk to the security folks, and the security folks don't talk to the developers sometimes, right? And it's just normal. But ideally, we're all doing this for the same purpose, right? So it's just knowing, like, keeping in mind that security should be top of mind for everyone. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Thank you for the time.